All right, so this is the Unit 7 presentation 4 for the Middle East, and this is going over other conflicts in the region. So the previous presentation we looked at, of course, the conflict in Israel between Israel and the Palestinians. So this one's just kind of hitting other conflicts in the region that have occurred over the past 50 or 60 years. So the first one's Cyprus, and this is really simple. It's an island, it's closer to Turkey, but Greece has also claimed part of the island as well. And so the Greek and Turkish Cypriots fought each other over control of the island. The UN got involved and basically set up a border between the two. As you can see, basically right in here is the border. And they separated the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots. So today they live in relative peace. And then you get to one of the big ones. So this one you need to understand, and of course the U.S. role in this war. Between Iraq and Iran, and there's some clear differences between these two countries that you need to know that still exist today to an extent. All right, so in 1958, Iraq turned to a military dictatorship. Then by 1968, Saddam Hussein took over. So you see him there. He's the one we captured in Iraq back in, I think it was 2004, and he was hung in 2006 for war crimes against humanity. And then 1979, Iran had its own Islamist revolution led by this guy, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. And with this, they bring in Islam as the ruling force, basically, in the government. So it becomes a theocracy. So Sharia law begins to rule the country, which is incredibly strict. Any opposition, of course, is jailed and things like that. And then 1980 through 88, you get the Iran-Iraq War, and you need to know all that really goes into this. Obviously, part of this can be over oil that's along the border here between Iraq and Iran, along the Zagros Mountains. But you also have other dimensions. Ethnically speaking, it's Arab versus Persian. So the Iraqis are Arabs ethnically, and the Iranians are Persian, which is a different ethnic group than Arab. And then politically, Iraq is more secular, which means separated from religion. So Saddam Hussein was a Sunni Muslim, but Islam didn't really rule the country. It wasn't a theocracy. Whereas in Iran is a theocratic state where the laws of Islam govern the country. And so then you get to the religious slide, the split, or religious side, there we go, with the split between Sunni and Shiite. You also see it spelled out as Shia. But this split, like speaking today as far as Muslims go, about 85 to 90% of Muslims are Sunni, 10 to 15% are Shiite in that range. Shiite tend to be the more strict Muslims, more traditional, whereas the Sunni tend to be a little bit more liberal. So most of the Muslims here in the United States are Sunni. Of course, we have some Shia. Generally speaking, you could say that more terrorists, when it comes to extremist Islam, come from the Shiite group, but you do see Sunni terrorists as well. But anyways, these two really go against each other, and really this divide came a long time ago, based on the idea of who should lead Islam. So Sunnis believe that the Caliph, which is the leader of Islam, should be, anyone that's an able leader. It doesn't really matter who it is, as long as they're an able leader. Whereas the Shiites believe that the leader of Islam should be a descendant of Muhammad, a direct descendant. So, think like a monarchy, basically. And so that's what started the split between the two. And so the Shias just tend to take what is written in the Quran and the Hadith a little bit more strict. And then the economy, of course, oil. Like I was saying, obviously a fight over oil. You also need to know that in this war, we backed Saddam Hussein. So we backed Iraq because they were more liberal, so more secular. They were Sunni. This didn't really matter up here. And, of course, oil. We had a better chance of trading oil with Iraq. And so we backed him. We gave him millions of dollars in weapons and all that, of course, which is going to backfire. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Now you get to the end of the Iran-Iraq war. So like I said, we supported them, gave them $5 billion because, again, we want to stop that Islamist movement. And it's key to understand what this Islamist movement is. So, again, Islamist is this idea of taking Islam, instead of making it a personal religion that's just about your own personal faith with God, it's about creating an Islamic state, taking over the world, cleansing the earth of the infidel, and creating an Islamic state that is ruled by the laws of Islam. ISIS is your example. So That's basically the idea there. So we still today we're trying to stop this idea of an Islamist movement, of creating an Islamic state, for that reason. So and then the Persian Gulf War. So Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, down here, and he wanted to control the oil land here. And going back to World War II, when almost said Saddam, when Hitler went out and took the Sudetenland and the Rhineland and stuff like that, those are territories he took over before the war actually started, and no one did anything. They were just kind of like, well, just don't take any more land. Like that wasn't very nice. Well, that didn't work out well. Instead, that gave him more reason to take more because it looked like no one was going to do anything about it. So when you fast forward to Saddam Hussein doing this isn't really any different than Hitler just going in and taking the Sudetenland and the Rhineland from Czechoslovakia and from France. So we move into free Kuwait of the Iraqi army. So this is back in 1991, Persian Gulf War, also known as Operation Desert Storm. So we moved in along with the United Nations and pushed the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. Now, a key difference with this war between when you compare it to the most recent Iraq war is that we did not go into Iraq. So we just went to Kuwait, pushed the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and then stopped. So this war only took 6 weeks. It wasn't that long at all. Now, connecting it to the 2003 U.S.-Iraq war, it's a couple of different, I'm trying to think of this. You need to know the differences between this war and the Afghanistan war. And then also the connection between the 91 war in Iraq and the 2003 through 2011 war in Iraq. So first off, a lot of people will say, the war in Iraq was a result of 9/11. Or, some will say, old Bush did 9/11, so he had a reason to invade Iraq and stuff like that, that's honestly, it's BS. So what happened with this, basically, you go back to 91, Saddam Hussein had used chemical weapons on his people in 88, 89, and committed a genocide against the Kurdish people. And so he had used weapons of mass destruction before. So again, that's what WMD is here. And had them in his possession before. And so after the 91 war, basically there was an agreement saying that the UN would be able to send in peacekeeper troops to make sure they didn't have any WMDs. And so that continued to happen throughout the 90s, get to the early 2000s, and Saddam Hussein says no more. He doesn't allow them to come in and investigate and see if he has any WMDs. During that time, Israeli, French, German, British, and American intelligence were all pointing towards the fact that he had WMDs and had them on the ground and they were ready to be used. So there's a couple scary propositions that could have come from this. Either he would use it again on his own people for genocide, or maybe use it against another ally in the Middle East like Israel, or he could sell it to terrorists that would then use it on us. And so you can see like a loose connection to 9/11 as far as obviously the fear of terrorism and what terrorists could do next after 9/11. But this war was more about Saddam Hussein not opening up his country and allowing us to come in and see if he had WMDs. And of course, our intelligence, along with other Western powers, was telling us that it was there on the ground. So we went in 2003. Now, the problems with this war is we didn't have a good exit strategy. We didn't have a clear objective, and when you don't have an absolutely clear objective and then a clear exit strategy, like what are you going to do after you go in there on top of the government? That's the problem. That's what created the problem and why we had to stay there so long. Because if we had just left the country after toppling their government and kicking Saddam out of power, that would have created the ingredients for what we're seeing happening now, basically with ISIS, for the most part. So what's happening in Syria with ISIS would have happened in Iraq back then. So basically, once you break it, you buy it. And so we had to stay there and try to help prop up a new government and then train them to defend their own country. So that's where it fell apart. So it's basically what that war was about, was that Saddam was not allowing us to come in to check like he was supposed to. And our intelligence was telling us he had WMDs, which could possibly be sold to terrorists and things like that. And then Afghanistan. So there's two wars here. You got the Soviet War, 79 through 89, basically. And the Soviets are trying to take over Afghanistan, but then you have this group called Al-Qaeda and the Taliban that are fighting to keep them out. Now, at this time, it was Osama bin Laden that was really leading this fight against the Soviets. So during that war, we supported Osama bin Laden to fight the Soviets, because at that time, the Soviet Union was a way bigger threat than a couple of crazy people on donkeys, and so we supported them. Soviets withdraw. A couple of years later, Soviet Union's gone, totally disappeared. So now Al Qaeda and the Taliban focuses their efforts towards the United States as a target instead of the Soviet Union. And so then you start seeing the buildup towards 9/11. They start planning for 9/11 back in 1994. Of course, executed in 2001. And then it was after this that we invade Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is directly related to 9/11. That's a big difference between the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan, we went in within 2 months after 9/11, month and a half, 2 months. And also the other difference with this war is that this was totally supported by NATO and the UN. So a lot of countries are involved in this fight against terrorism, because it's not just Afghanistan. That's where we went on the ground and put troops in. But the war against terrorism is a global war, including here in our own country. I mean, there's terrorist cells in the United States. So it's not just a single country. Today, we're still in Afghanistan, so it's still a continuing war. Of course, now the government is a pro-U.S. government that's supporting us. But the problem is they're just not stable enough to control their own country and to protect themselves, and that's why we are still there. All right, so that's it.